What's going on, everybody? In today's video we are taking a look at a really wacky VR game called TIMEHACKER. This is a really fun little kind of arcade style game where the whole idea is that you are somebody who is able to effectively slow down time to be able to take advantage of your enemies. Now, it looks like you play some kind of a superhero type dude going straight into bullet time at the beginning of every match in order to be able to wreak havoc upon just about anyone and anything, allowing you to basically move objects and move certain enemies, such as the silver ones, to allow you to execute certain maneuvers. Now, the interesting tactic here is that the golden enemies are not something that you can actually move. They pose a really big threat because you have to take them out first, meaning that every single kind of little battle is going to be a kind of game of chess as to figure out which ways you're able to dispose of the golden enemies the fastest, and sometimes moving the silver enemies around so that they no longer pose any kind of a threat, as they tend to be the main ones with a firearm. Now, there are different kind of environmental objects that you can use to your advantage. Obviously, your typical red explodey barrel comes in a serious kind of advantage to you here, allowing you to essentially make a serious explosion that in turn alleviates any issues you might have with enemies that have a number of guns pointed at you, or when there's a big group that effectively needs to be taken care of. Now, this is probably one of the primary ways that you'll see enemies being taken out. However, there are also a number of different other environmental hazards that you'll see that can be used to your advantage. One of the other kind of really big ones that we'll notice in here is going to be electricity. This is something, again, that just makes the game a lot of fun. And you can also see that there are dynamite or TNT type explosives that can be used to essentially stick onto your enemies to blow them up. And this is a really fun portion of the game because, again, it just makes it that much easier for you to plan the explosions and effectively take out the entire, basically enemy range at the same time. Now, you will come across certain areas where you'll have to shoot down chains, or you're going to have to basically move cars out of the way by turning the steering wheel into the path of your enemies, effectively making it seem like they ran over their own friends, which again is just a really neat tactic that this game employs. Now, as far as the overall graphics in the title, they're nothing to write home about. They have sort of their own aesthetic, and as it stands, it is a little bit cartoony, so that's something to keep in mind, but it's not something I found particularly troublesome. The Beretta M9 model that is in here is pretty well, generally realized, and you also have some really funny effects that happen, as well as basically a number of debris that explodes in all kinds of directions should you bust open boxes or when explosions happen, which is just a blast to watch in slow-mo because you get to see all the various pieces that essentially end up going all over the place. Now, there's not a whole lot to the game beyond sort of this time-slowing mechanic. However, it is just fun to mess around, and you can also just stand there and try to dodge your enemy's bullets in slow motion as you would as if you were in the Matrix, which is also fun in its own right. Now, there is a level editor in here. I'm not really going to go and delve into it too much, but essentially you can customize and create your own scenarios of hilariousness that will then ensue should you make the levels have basically every single environmental hazard possible, and essentially at that point just make your own levels for others to enjoy, which again is probably just going to be a huge blast. Now, I do think that they could have kind of implemented a little bit more in terms of the mechanics in this title. It would have been fun to be able to, for example, kick tables into enemies and send them flying. You can, however, grab them and throw them into things like jet engines and various sort of spinning fans to essentially just get rid of them in that particular way. However, there aren't too many opportunities where you get to really exploit that to its fullest. However, I would have to say that the amount of variety in the levels is generally a good amount of fun. As you can see, here is the car section where you'll be able to slow down the game to be able to use that to your advantage to take out enemies. There are also going to be certain levels where verticality is involved, where the enemies are going to be on top of a number of barrels, and you can essentially send either a car or some kind of explosive flying into said barrels to take the enemies down to your level so that they can be dispatched, which again is just an absolute blast to do. And as you can see, you can also just watch everything happen in slow motion, or you can basically phase back into your character to allow you to unslow the time, which again is a really neat kind of way of going about it. Definitely different from SuperHot, where the whole idea is that time slows down only when you're stopped, and as soon as you start moving it unfreezes. Here you get to essentially control what happens with the time. Unfortunately, there is no way of rewinding, so once you've committed to a certain number of steps and time has been slowed, the only thing you can do really is progress forward, which means that it does add a certain element that makes the game a little bit more stressful, but by and large, this is not a particularly difficult title unless you are being a complete idiot or just trying to kind of mess around with the physics in the game, etc. Now, with that said, again, there are certainly certain mechanics that, as you can see, don't work 100% of the time. I found that phasing back into my own character at times didn't work unless I was super close, and I'm not sure if that's a feature or a bug within the title, but it is an early access game, so it is entirely possible that they will be making some additional changes here to essentially make it so that there are less bugs. Now, I haven't really experienced too many game-breaking issues with this title so far. Everything for the most part works, and you can probably get through this title in about 2 hours if you just do everything the way it's supposed to be done, and provided that the traps and whatever mechanics that are available to you don't end up basically giving you a hard time. Generally speaking, this is not going to be a particularly difficult game to get through in general. Now, as far as replay value goes, unfortunately there's also not a whole lot to say there, because by and large the solutions are going to be relatively similar. You can't simply take enemies and throw them at objects in the hopes that they die. You also can't really use objects like the carts or certain cars to crush your enemies, which would have been an interesting addition, as it would have allowed for a different type of gameplay to be executed here to allow your enemies to be killed in various different ways. And unfortunately, the maps don't allow you to really get out of the main kind of stage of different areas, which means you're going to be stuck for the most part on the same plane as all of your enemies to allow you to only take them down in the specific way that the level is supposed to be solved, which again I think is a bit of a missed opportunity here given how much potential is available, given that there are still a number of different sort of physics objects that can be used here to your advantage. Now, I do believe that this is a game that you guys should definitely check out, mainly because it's just a lot of fun and it's something different, not necessarily like a lot of the other VR titles, which typically stick to the same sort of mechanics, where it's either some kind of a shooter, it's some kind of a puzzle game, or it's, you know, just something else in terms of racing. But there's nothing really like this per se. Again, probably the closest thing would be SuperHot VR, but the mechanics are still rather different here, and this has a different sort of artistic style to it as well, unlike a lot of the stuff you'll see out there. Now, I am also going to do a review of another game by this developer a little bit later on in the week, so stick around for that. In the meantime, check out this game. I'll put a link in the description below, and you guys can take a look and ultimately enjoy this really fun and slightly whimsical title by this really awesome developer. So stick around until the next video. It's been Crazy Welder.